You wouldn't last a day as a bell ringer in a medieval cathedral. Take a deep breath and let yourself settle back. Tonight, we're going to journey together into the towering spires of medieval Europe, where stone reached toward heaven and bronze voices called across entire cities. Imagine yourself not as a visiting pilgrim or wealthy patron, but as someone whose life was measured not in years or seasons, but in the rhythm of bells. A life measured by quarters, by vigils, by matins, by lauds, by evensong. Your existence would be a tapestry woven with the resonant chimes of a dozen bells, their music dictating the very pulse of your existence. Your day would begin before the sun, for you are the son of the bell tower. The tower knows no master, save the clock's relentless tick-tock. Your first duty is to rouse the city, to shake the slumbering folk from their beds with a mighty peal that announces, "Arise, arise, the day is born anew." And as the response echoes back at you from the startled citizens, you know that your work has only just begun. The morning would find you scaling the narrow spiral stairs of the bell tower, your rope-trained hands gripping the cold stone handholds as you climb toward the singing gallery high above the rooftops. Up here, the air is thin, and the wind bites with the chill of a miser's heart. But when you reach the ringing room, your reward is a glorious vista that makes every aching muscle and creaking joint worthwhile. Below you, the city awakens, stretching and yawning, readying itself for another day of toil and petty squabbles. Above you, the heavens alone, where angels might have walked had they ever deigned to tread such humble boards. And around you, the bells, each a different voice, yet all answering to your command. In the hours before noon, you would strike up a lively jig, a merry tune to spur the laggards into action and announce the approach of midday. Then comes the long wait, the stretch of time when even a well-oiled clockwork mechanism would grow weary. For as the sun climbs higher and the heat grows more oppressive, you must endure the ceaseless drone of flies, the taunts of passing children, and the frustrating silence of bells that have nothing to say. But as the afternoon wanes, the bells begin their song once more, solemn dirge to toll the passing of the day and warn the sinners to repent. The evening air grows colder now, and you wrap your threadbare cloak more tightly around your shoulders as you ring in the night. In the gloaming, you would strike up one last joyous peal, a fanfare to bid the day farewell and make ready for the coming dawn. Then down the tower you go, back into the city, into the warm embrace of the tavern, where the smell of stale waste and chamber pots mingles with the heady aroma of ale and roasting meat. Here you shed your mantle of responsibility, if only for a stolen moment, before returning tomorrow to your lonely vigil in the cold embrace of the tower. And as the night wears on, you would hear the other patrons laughing, drinking, brawling perhaps, and know that none of them understood the burden borne by those who watched over the city from the bell tower high above. You are the keeper of time, the master of the hours, the servant of the clock. And though your name may be lost to history, your work echoes through the ages. For every chime you cast was a prayer ascending to heaven, a supplication to the Almighty to grant the city's sinners a few more moments of grace. You are the bell ringer of the cathedral, and your story is written in the very fabric of the tower, a testament to endurance, dedication, and an utter lack of fear for those blessed and cursed to hear the bell's eternal song. For you, the climb up the winding stairs would be a daily torment, a test of your physical and mental mettle. For the bells demanded not just your obedience, but your total immersion into their ancient ritual. They required that you live and breathe according to their timeless rhythms, come rain or shine, feast or famine, joy or sorrow. Your life would be an endless cycle of toil, punctuated only by the brief respites between the ringing, during which you would perform minor repairs on the bells and rigging, ensuring that their music would continue uninterrupted. The hours would pass like ships on the night, each bearing a different cargo of sound, and you would be the one to guide their passage, to ensure that the melody of the city never faltered. Now, resting in the safety of your modern home, surrounded by the comforts of electricity and central heating, you might scoff at the prospect of such a life. Yet those medieval bell ringers did it day in and day out, year after year, until their hands grew too old and stiff to grip the ropes. And in doing so, they wove their bodies and souls into the very fabric of the towers they inhabited. So much so that if these ancient stones could speak, they would whisper tales of the bell ringers who sacrificed so much to keep their music alive. It's late. Very late. Past midnight. Past the witching hour. The night is filled with the restless activity of those who hunt in the darkness. Those who prowl the shadows and those who rise from their graves. It is the night of the living dead. And you are alone in the tower of a great medieval cathedral. Below, the city slumbers, ignorant of the danger that stalks the streets. And as the seconds tick by, a low moan begins to creep up the stone stairs toward your sanctuary. What do you do? Welcome back to the series where we give you the opportunity to step into historical situations and make decisions based on what you know about the past. Your goal is to pick the option that will help you survive the situation. Remember, though, that there may be multiple options, all of which have their merits, so choose wisely as the undead approach. You scramble for the safety of the locked door at the top of the tower. But even as you fumble with the heavy iron bar, you realize that this is going to take too long. There simply isn't time. Instead, you fling open a second door and dive through. Finally, breathing hard, you would reach the bell chamber. Here, hanging in the darkness like sleeping giants, would be the bronze bells that governed the rhythm of medieval life. These weren't the neat, mechanized systems of later centuries. These were massive bronze vessels, some weighing thousands of pounds, suspended from thick wooden beams that creaked ominously with each movement. The largest bells required ropes thick as a man's wrist, and the smaller ones still demanded more strength than you might expect. Your job as a 15th century bell ringer is simple. Ring the bells to announce matins, the first canonical prayer of the day. But you've heard the rumors that plague has arrived in the city. You haven't seen it yet, but you know that if you do, it means certain death. Could the moaning below be one of the afflicted? Will you escape if it is? First, let's talk about the bells themselves. These were not dainty instruments meant to be struck lightly. No, these were the alarm bells of the medieval world. Loud enough to be heard over the din of market day, and clear enough to signal not just that Mass was beginning, but what kind of Mass and what kind of day it was. They were rung vigorously, requiring strong arms and sturdy frames. In fact, the bell tower was considered one of the worst places to be during a thunderstorm, because the massive bells acted like giant lightning rods, attracting the attention of the sky and sometimes the unfortunate bell ringer. When it came time to ring the bells, the process began with a ritual washing. The clapper, the part of the bell that strikes the bronze and creates sound, was dipped in holy water to sanctify the coming prayer. Then the rope, which had likely never been cleaned, was wiped down with a coarse cloth to remove any dirt or debris. This both made it easier to grip the rope and ensured that no vermin would make their presence felt by scurrying up the line. Once everything was as ready as it would be, it was time to begin. And here we see the first choice before you. Do you begin ringing immediately, or take your time? Bells were rung before sunrise, but exactly when depended on the time of year. Winter mornings brought icy darkness that lasted until well into the first hour of daylight. Summer mornings brought sun before many of the faithful had awakened. Rushing to start the ritual as soon as possible would risk producing an unpleasant sound. Starting slowly would ensure a gentler tone.
Out. What will you do?
The first strokes of the bell carry the sound of prayer across the sleeping city. People stir in their beds, and animals stir in the stalls. For a moment, peace reigns supreme as people come to or remain asleep. You continue ringing, watching the beams sway gently beneath you. Suddenly, a loud crack echoes through the bell chamber, followed by the thud of metal on stone. One of the larger bells has broken free of its mountings. It swings wildly from side to side, threatening to crush you beneath its bronze bulk. Your first thought is, how do you stop it? But the answer is obvious. If you don't do something, the bell will swing back and forth until it is nothing more than twisted metal on the ground. Its collapse will also bring down the adjacent bells, turning the bell chamber into a graveyard of bronze. But then another thought strikes you. People are going to hear that noise. Will they think that you broke the bells? Who would hold you responsible if they did? In the midst of this crisis, you hear the sound of pounding feet on the stairs leading to the bell tower. Voices rise in alarm. Are these the watchmen, alerted by the noise of breaking wood? Or is something worse clambering up the stairs? You feel a hot draft on your neck as the lead climber reaches the bell chamber. You can hear him now, calling out as he looks around for the source of the commotion. If you want to hide, you will have to move fast. You glance at the other bells, calculating how much time you have. The big bell is still swinging, but the others are safe. That is until the big bell stops. You race across the chamber, flinging yourself behind a stout wooden pillar. The footsteps stop outside the door. Now you wait, holding your breath, listening intently. The voice speaks again, this time asking whether anyone is up here. When you hear the footsteps recede once more, you let out a long breath. That was close, but you still have to deal with the collapsed bell and the fact that somebody is out there looking for whoever broke it. Bells were expensive and labor-intensive to produce. They were also incredibly useful, providing not just a way to mark the hours, but a method of communication across distances. An able bell ringer could convey messages of all kinds using his craft. But you weren't just an able bell ringer, you were the bell ringer. Whatever happened to the bells was ultimately your responsibility. You knew that your wages depended on keeping them in good repair, and the threat of unemployment hung over you like a dark cloud. What will you do next? You emerge from your hiding spot, dusting yourself off. It's time to fix the bell. You know just how to do it. First, you find a sturdy ladder and lean it against the beam holding the bell. Then you climb up, taking care to test the wood's stability as you ascend. You look down into the bell chamber, noting the spots where the fallen clapper has struck the floor. Now you begin the process of raising the bell back onto its mooring hooks, checking frequently to ensure the beam is secure. All the while, you keep an ear out for any sounds from below. After a few minutes, you hear the distinct sound of footsteps returning to the bell tower. You quickly scramble down the ladder, hoping that whoever is approaching won't notice the evidence of your recent repairs. As the footsteps approach, you stand perfectly still, pretending to have been ringing the bells all along. The bell tower door opens, and a watchman enters. He looks at you, surprised to see someone already up here. You quickly explain that you were just finishing up, and the watchman seems satisfied with your explanation. He leaves, closing the door behind him. Now that you're alone again, you think about what to do next. You're hungry and thirsty, but that can wait. You need to rest for a bit. You climb down the ladder and walk over to a nearby window. Looking out, you can see the rising sun painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. You can also see the bustling activity of the city as merchants set up shop and artisans head to their workshops. You turn away from the window and decide it's finally time to take a break. But as you do, you hear the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Someone is nearby, and they mean you harm. You whirl around and search for a weapon, anything that can help defend you against whatever menace is out there. All you find is a loose brick, small but solid. You throw it toward the window, and it smashes against the pane. Whoever was out there recoils slightly, but then pushes on through the opening. You step back and prepare to defend yourself. The figure steps through the window and into the bell tower. It is tall and gaunt, with skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes are blank and soulless. It lunges at you, and you instinctively raise your arm to block the attack. The brick falls from your numb fingers, and the creature's claws rake across your shoulder, tearing into your flesh. You scream in pain and surprise, and the creature pauses, cocking its head to one side. It seems almost amused by your reaction. Then it lunges again, and you stumble backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. The creature is on top of you in an instant, and you can feel its hot, fetid breath on your face. It hisses, and you know that the end is near. Are you fit enough to be a medieval bell ringer? That's exactly what we're going to find out in today's episode. It's hard manual labor that requires a high level of fitness. In the heart of Europe during the Middle Ages, steeples were the watchtowers of the people. From them, not only did preachers deliver sermons, they rang alarm bells, warned of invaders, and informed citizens of the day's perils. Steeple ringing was one of the most important jobs in a town, and one that required the strongest of men. Today, we're going to look at how much climbing you'd have to do to become a steeple ringer. We'll also examine the surprising physical toll this job took on the body. You may think that being a steeple ringer would have been easy. After all you're doing is ringing a bell. But don't be fooled. It wasn't quite so simple. To begin with, let us take a look at a typical church tower and see how many stairs you'd have to climb if you wanted to ring the bell. There are many different types of church towers, but let's use the tower at Canterbury Cathedral as an example. This tower is 67 meters tall and contains 142 steps. So if you wanted to reach the top of the tower, you would need to climb 142 steps twice, once to get up and once to get down, for a total of 284 steps. If you wanted to climb the tower 3 times, you would need to climb 852 steps. And if you wanted to climb the tower 6 times, you would need to climb a whopping 1692 steps. These numbers may seem small compared to the number of steps you might climb in a day as a steeple ringer. Keep in mind that medieval towers weren't equipped with the modern conveniences such as an elevator, which means that every time you wanted to ring the bell, you would have to climb all the way to the top of the tower. But climbing stairs was only the beginning. Once you reached the top of the tower, you would need to climb into the bell chamber. And this was no easy feat. Bell chambers were typically dark, dank, and cramped. In some cases, the only way to get to the bell chamber was to climb a spiral staircase inside the tower. For example, the tower at Salisbury Cathedral contains a spiral staircase with 354 steps. That means that every time you wanted to ring the bell, you would need to climb 354 steps up a narrow, winding staircase. And don't forget that you'd have to do this not just once, but at least 6 times a day. But even if you managed to get to the bell chamber without losing your breath, you still wouldn't be able to ring the bells. That is because the medieval bells were typically so large that they required 2 or even 3 people to ring them. The largest bells could weigh up to 15 tons, which means that each person would have to pull on a rope that was attached to the bell several feet off the ground. To ring the bell properly, you would need to pull the rope with all your might and then release it just as quickly. This required not just strength, but also stamina and flexibility. Imagine yourself pulling on a thick rope that weighs several hundred pounds. First, it might be easy enough, but after a few minutes, your arms would start to ache and your shoulders would begin to burn. As time went on, the task would become more and more difficult, until finally your muscles would start to cramp and your entire body would feel like it was on fire. Despite the difficulty, you would need to repeat this process over and over again for hours on end. And that's not all. You would also need to make sure that the bells didn't stop ringing. That meant that you would need to keep up a steady rhythm, which wasn't easy. After all, you were working not just for an hour or two, but for 8 or even 9 hours at a time. And if you made a mistake and broke the rhythm, the other bell ringers would have to stop and start again. That could be disastrous if you were supposed to be ringing in a funeral or some other important ceremony. If that wasn't enough, you would also need to make sure that the bells didn't get out of tune. That meant that you would need to adjust the clapper, which was a metal bar that hung inside the bell and made it ring. This wasn't easy because the clapper had to be adjusted perfectly. If it was too loose, the bell would sound flat. If it was too tight, the bell would sound sharp. It took years of experience to learn how to adjust the clapper properly, and a single mistake could ruin an entire performance. The fact that steeples were often built on top of cathedrals added another layer of difficulty. Cathedrals were typically the tallest buildings in town, which meant that they were often used as watchtowers and bell towers. That meant that the bell ringers had to be able to climb to the top of the cathedral every time they needed to ring the bells. But this also meant that the bell ringers had an amazing view of the town. From their perch atop the cathedral, they could see everything that was happening below, and they were truly at the center of town life. So how fit did you need to be a medieval bell ringer? You would need to be strong enough to climb a spiral staircase with 354 steps at least 6 times a day. You would need to be flexible enough to pull on a rope that weighed several hundred pounds. And you would need to have the stamina to work for hours on end without stopping. But despite the difficulty of the job, there were rewards. Not only were the bells an important part of medieval life, they were also a source of pride for the community. To be a bell ringer was to be an important member of the town. You were responsible for keeping the bells ringing, and that meant that you were helping to keep the community informed and united. Imagine the feeling of standing in a bell chamber surrounded by massive bells. As you pull on the rope, the bell rings out, echoing across the town. People below look up at the tower and listen to the sound of the bell. They know that you are there, and they know that you are doing your job. It's a feeling of responsibility, but also a feeling of pride. And when you were done, you knew that you had made a difference in the lives of the people around you. You might want to see how these incredible bells were made. The demands of the bell schedule would often intrude upon your sleep, rousing you from your slumber in the dead of night. In certain seasons of the church calendar, special vigils or extended periods of prayer required you to wake multiple times during the night to ring the appropriate calls to worship. Imagine being jolted awake in the darkness, the only sound your own breathing and the distant hum of the city. Then the realization that you must now clamber out of bed, pull on your clothes, and ascend the narrow, twisting stairs of the bell tower. Each step takes you higher into the cold, dark silence, broken only by the creak of the ancient stones beneath your feet. At the top, you pause, catching your breath and listening intently. The bells above you are silent now, but in a few moments they will begin their nightly chorus, and you must be ready. Your small chamber, carved into the very stone of the tower, is cold in winter and stifling in summer. By day, the sun may stream through the narrow windows high above, painting stripes of gold on the rough stone floor. But as the hours pass, the warmth fades and the shadows grow longer. When the evening chill sets in, the tower begins to sweat. Dampness seeps through the cracks in the masonry, tracing little rivers down the walls. Even the bells themselves, usually so comforting in their sonorousness, seem to groan with the cold, their metal bodies contracting and sighing in the night. You huddle deeper into your threadbare blanket, seeking solace in the darkness, but rest proves elusive. By the time the first call to matins arrives, you are wide awake. You dress quickly, your hands moving with the practiced ease of one who has done this many times before. As you climb the stairs, the dampness clings to your legs, seeping through your worn shoes and chilling your feet. The sound of the other bells mingles with the distant murmur of the city waking up. When you reach the bell chamber, the sight that greets you makes your heart sink. The floor is littered with pools of water, reflecting the faint glow of the oil lamp hanging from a beam above. The walls are slick with condensation, and the rope ladder leading up to the bells hangs like a sodden shroud. With a sigh, you begin the ritual of drying the ropes, a necessary precaution against the risk of slipping while ringing. You run the ropes back and forth, feeling the roughness of the hemp fibers beneath your fingertips. Each movement sends a shower of droplets crashing to the floor, making a small, sad sound in the vast emptiness of the chamber. Once the ropes are dry, you turn your attention to the bells themselves. You run your hands along their surfaces, feeling the cool bronze beneath your touch. The largest bell, the tenor, is too heavy to ring without assistance. So you stand on a low ledge beside it, bracing your foot against the stone wall and pulling with all your might. The bell swings, sending out a deep resonant note that echoes through the chamber and out over the city. One by one, you ring the other bells, each producing its own unique sound, their music blending and intertwining. As the last bell rings, you lean against the frame, listening to the fading echoes. For a moment, the silence is absolute, broken only by your own breathing. Then you hear it again. The slow, steady toll of a distant clock. It is still early, but the hours will pass quickly. And soon, it will be time to ring the bells once more. Food is a simple fare: bread, cheese, and dried meat spiced with the fragrant dust of the bell chamber. Meals are eaten standing up, eaten cold, eaten quickly between rounds of ringing. Hunger is a constant companion, a dull ache in your belly that never quite goes away. Sometimes it is worse, a gnawing emptiness that makes it hard to concentrate on your work. You find yourself reaching for the bell ropes with shaky hands, your movements sluggish and off rhythm. The other bell ringers notice and exchange uneasy glances. Accidents can happen when the mind wanders. A slip of the hand can send a hammer crashing to the floor. A misstep on the stairs can send you tumbling down the tower. You push the thoughts of food and hunger away, focusing on the task at hand. The bell schedule must be kept. The people of the city depend on you to rouse them for prayer, to signal the hours as they go about their daily business, to call them to worship on Sundays and feast days. You are their silent servants, unseen and unnoticed, yet your work is essential to the rhythm of their lives. Water is a precious commodity, especially in summer, and the climb leaves you parched and thirsty. The effort of hauling yourself up the narrow stairs, the heat of the bell chamber, the constant ringing, all of it makes you long for a cool drink. You remember the well at the bottom of the tower, its stone lip offering a temporary respite from the heat. There you can sit, dangle your feet in the cool water, and let the sound of the fountain soothe your tired ears. But now you are needed in the bell chamber. You wipe the sweat from your brow and hurry to your place at the ropes, knowing that water will have to wait once more. You move through the motions mechanically, your body betraying you. Every muscle aches with the memory of yesterday's climbs. Your hands are blistered and raw from gripping the ropes, and your feet are sore from standing on the narrow ledges beside the bells. But you do not dare sit down. To rest would be to invite disaster. A single misstep, a false note, a moment's lapse in concentration, any one of these could spell disaster. You grit your teeth and force yourself to keep going. As the weeks pass, you find that your body adjusts to the bell schedule. Your muscles tense in anticipation of each climbing session. Even before your conscious mind registers the passing of the hours, you learn to recognize the subtlest differences in bell tones, the softest variations in sound that indicate proper ringing. The bells become an extension of your own voice, their music flowing from your fingertips to the hollows of your bones. At the same time, the constant exposure to the overwhelming sound of the bells dulls your hearing in other ways. Distant sounds become harder to make out. Voices on the street below seem muffled and distorted, and the songs of birds are lost to the din. But you do not mind. Your world is here in the bell chamber, in the measured rhythm of the bells, in the steady pulse of the tower. In winter, the bell tower becomes a place of hardship and peril. The stone stairs are treacherous with ice or condensation, slick as glass and hiding treacherous drops. The ropes stiffen with cold, making them harder to grip and more likely to cause injury. Each climb is a test of endurance, the effort of hauling yourself upward made all the more difficult by the biting wind. At the top, the bell chamber offers no respite. The bronze bells feel cold and lifeless beneath your touch, their usual warmth drained away by the relentless chill. Your breath hangs visible in the frigid air, and your fingers, too numb to feel the roughness of the ropes, sometimes lose their grip entirely. The bells themselves sound different in the cold air, their tones sharper and more brittle, requiring constant adjustments in your technique to maintain the proper sound. Summer brings its own difficulties. The stone towers act like ovens, the heat rising with each step you climb. By the time you reach the top, you are soaked in sweat, your clothes clinging to your skin like a second layer. The bell chamber is stifling, the bronze bells too hot to touch safely. The ropes are slick and dangerous beneath your fingertips, and the combined heat and exertion leave you dizzy and nauseated after each climbing session. Yet you continue, driven by duty and the fear of what might happen if the bells are not rung. People may miss morning prayer, merchants may lose track of time, worshippers may fail to make it to Sunday services. The bell schedule must be kept, come what may. Through it all, the bells stand silent and unchanging, their solemn music echoing through the centuries. They have witnessed countless summers and winters, countless changes in the city below, and they will continue to do so long after you are gone. Their timeless song, a reminder of the human endeavor that has echoed within their depths for so long. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the first two videos we released last week on medieval bell ringing. If you missed them, you can find them in the description or check out the links at the end of this video. And as a reward for sticking around until the end, here's an adorable picture of the Bishop of Durham's cat, which is apparently good luck if you happen to see it. In our last video, we discussed how exactly bells were rung in the Middle Ages. So now it's time to talk about what that job was actually like. What did the workday of a medieval bell ringer look like? What sort of training and skill set did one need to be a bell ringer? And what might life have been like once you got that coveted position? Now, before we get into it, I should note that my interpretation of these images and texts are likely to be different than yours. Different people will take away different things when looking at the same source material, and that's perfectly okay. What I'm doing here is sharing with you the story that I find in the sources. If you find another story in them, then that's great. Feel free to share with me and everyone else in the comments below. But before we get started, let's turn to a source to see what it has to say. Yet perhaps the most challenging aspect of the bell ringer's life was not the physical demands, but the relentless, unchanging nature of the schedule. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the same stairs, the same ropes, the same overwhelming crash of bronze against bronze. There were no vacations, no sick days, no variation in the routine. The canonical hours waited for no one, and the community below depended on their bell ringer to maintain the sacred rhythm that structured their entire existence. And so it was with a heavy heart that on feast days, when the town below would celebrate with feasting and merriment, that the bell ringer knew he would spend his day alone in the bell tower. If there was a death in the family of the bell ringer, he could not attend the funeral. He was bound to his tower, not out of choice, but because the bells had to be rung for every service, rain or shine, feast or famine. His life was regulated entirely according to the needs of the bells. In the eyes of the community, there was no bell ringer and no bell tower. They simply knew that the bells must always be rung. Someone was always watching. The bells were a perpetual reminder of the passage of time, marking each hour of each day, summoning the faithful to prayer. For some communities, there would be a single bell, and so the ringer would have to climb up the tower, ring the bell for the proper amount of time, then climb down, only to do it all over again for the next 23 hours of the day. But generally speaking, for larger churches, there would be multiple bells. So the bell ringer would remain in the top chamber where the largest bells were located, and use a rope system to ring the bells from above. This is what life was like for a medieval bell ringer. When I think of the medieval period, my mind immediately goes to knights, kings, and castles, because that's what I consumed most of when reading about the Middle Ages growing up. However, only a small percentage of medieval people were noble, and the vast majority lived simple lives in villages or cities. To learn more about what their lives were like, I've started consuming more content created by historians, and it's been amazing. Honestly, it can be hard to sift through all the options and find quality content. That's why I was excited to partner with the history guy on this video. As we just discussed though, the ringer would be completely alone during his workday, save for the bells. But it wouldn't necessarily be a quiet workday, depending on the size of the church. Ringer might have to contend with the sound of other bells ringing for services, or even other ringers working. We know that many churches attempted to mitigate this issue by locating the bell chamber high up in the church tower, far from the floor and ceiling of the main chamber. This was done to stop the sound of the bells reverberating throughout the building and disturbing the congregation. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to have worked all that well. And many accounts from the period describe the deafening clamor of bells as a real nuisance. The best solution, it seemed, was to separate the ringer from the rest of the church by creating a second chamber, totally independent of the main tower, reached by a separate staircase, and entered through a trapdoor in the roof. This would ensure that the ringer would be safe from falling debris, while also keeping him as far away from the main chamber as possible. Even so, the bell ringer would probably still experience some level of hearing loss. Due to the constant noise of the bells ringing, you may have noticed that the bell ringer in this painting is wearing goggles. This is not for the purpose of protecting his eyes from flying debris, but instead to protect his ears. These goggles were specially designed earmuffs used to dampen the sound of the bells. Whether or not they were effective is unclear, but they certainly make for a striking image. Aside from the ever-present noise, the bell chamber would have been a dark place. No windows would be allowed since they would not only allow sound to escape, but also risk the entry of unwanted visitors. It would not be uncommon for a bell chamber to receive a single shaft of light per day, and so the ringer would have to time his breaks carefully if he wished to step outside for some fresh air and sunlight. Additionally, the ringing of the bells would only take up a portion of the ringer's day. The rest of the time would be spent maintaining the bells and the rigging, cleaning the bronze, readying the fire, etc. And so, in addition to the darkness, the bell chamber would also smell strongly of incense and smoke. This was especially true of larger churches that housed a large number of bells. To ring all of the bells at once would require a significant amount of manpower, and so oftentimes there would be 2 or 3 ringers working at once. Imagine the smell of burnt resin mixed with the sweat of several men, all under the hot sun beating down through a single skylight. The bell chamber was a difficult place to work. Despite all this, someone had to do it, and so a young boy would be selected by the church authorities, usually based on his ability to climb the tower quickly and easily. After all, a bell ringer needs to ascend and descend the tower several times a day, and he needed to do so quickly in order to get to the next service in time. Once inside the tower, the ringer would have to learn how to manipulate the ropes without falling behind. It took years to master the craft and become proficient at ringing the bells. The ringer would start his work at the bottom of the tower and work his way up, spending weeks or months learning the ropes and mastering the skill. If he was successful, he would earn a place among the highest servants of the church. To be a bell ringer was considered an honor, and those who mastered the skill would wear special clothing to distinguish themselves from other servants. Ringers would often wear a special badge or button on their clothes, or they might wear a white hood or a special type of belt. Whatever the custom, all of these served to remind the wearer of his responsibility to ring the bell and of the great tradition he was upholding. Life as a bell ringer was not easy, but it was important work. Without the bell ringer, the life of the church would be thrown into chaos. He was a vital member of the community, and his work helped to keep the world in order. But enough about the history. Have you ever rung a bell before? You want to? Or maybe you re a bell ringer and you have to endure the teasing of your fellow ringers about your goggles. Let us know about yourself and what you think about medieval bell ringers in the comments below. Also, thank you for reaching the end of the video. Please consider supporting the channel through the links in the description. Thanks for watching. Now let us follow the sound of those hammers and chisels and join our own voices to the chorus of these medieval builders. Somewhere in the foothills of the Italian Alps, the morning mist has yet to burn off the mountainside. A young man named Giovanni wakes in his family's farmhouse. Dawn is his signal to start work in the stone quarry. For most of human history, life revolved around the rhythms of sunrise and sunset, a fact that might seem obvious to those of us who live in an age of 24-hour convenience stores and late-night infomercials. But we are conditioned today to think of time as boundless, always available in greater or lesser amounts, depending on how much money we have to spend. The past few hundred years have seen humans invent machines that make life easier, faster, more productive. And along with that productivity came the sense that time is a currency that can be bought or sold. In the Middle Ages, however, time was a gift from God, to be used and enjoyed each day while it was given, then set aside with thanks when night fell. Arriving at the quarry, Giovanni joins his father and two older brothers. They are three of about 20 men who work here, producing stone for construction projects throughout northern Italy. While some quarries were attached to monasteries or large estates and provided building materials in kind for ongoing projects, more often stone was purchased and sold by merchants who contracted with masons and architects to supply particular building projects. These merchants had their own financial interests to consider, so they sought out the cheapest way to acquire the best stone, both for their own profit and to ensure the structure they were working on would stand the test of time. For this reason, a good working relationship between quarry owners and builders was vital. But this interdependence was one born of necessity and not camaraderie. It was hard, dangerous, seasonal work, and no one made very much money from selling stone. That was true even if you owned the quarry. The men prepare for the day by sharpening their tools, checking ropes and pulleys, and securing their harnesses and helmets. Safety was a low priority for these men. Their employers preferred to pay for replacements than for injuries. Once everything is in order, they begin to scale the steep ladders that lead up into the heart of the mountain. Here among these huge blocks of limestone, the men look like ants. And indeed, that's exactly what the writer John Ruskin compared them to in his 1851 book, The Stones of Venice. Like ants, these men worked industriously in the dark recesses of the mountain to bring forth the raw materials that would form the bodies of great buildings. But there is another creature the quarrymen remind us of, the bee. Just as bees use the pollen they gather to make honey, the masons will use the rough stone the quarrymen pull from the earth to create structures of enduring sweetness. Unlike honey, however, whose flavor may vary, the end product of a well-built church tower or palace wall is a result of strict adherence to tradition. No variations are allowed. For many centuries, the techniques for cutting and shaping stone did not change significantly. Using rudimentary tools and relying on the strength of their arms and backs, quarriers would wet out the stone from the face of the mountain with wedges made from iron or bronze. Then once detached from the cliff face, the blocks were squared and smoothed by hand, using nothing more sophisticated than a hammer and chisel. The men shouted to each other over the din of the stone striking metal, passing along instructions from those who could see the desired lines of a block to those who stood ready to strike, and those who stood ready to receive the stone blocks onto their sledges. To move the stone down the mountain, they fastened them onto long, flat sledges made of wood, reinforced with iron bands and rollers. These sledges were too heavy to be moved by manpower alone, so the quarrymen brought in teams of oxen to haul them down the winding paths that snaked from the cliffs to the waiting carts. Once at the bottom, the oxen were unhooked and led back up the mountain to rest before beginning their labors again. Meanwhile, the stone blocks were loaded onto carts and sent away to wherever they were needed. Sometimes the quarriers would be paid in cash, sometimes in food, and sometimes in room and board for the night. Regardless of the payment, there was no time to waste. There were more blocks to cut, more stone to shape, and always the next mountain to climb. At the construction site, the newly arrived stone blocks sat waiting for their turn. They were too big to be carried by men, and too heavy to be rolled by oxen. So now they awaited the arrival of the crane, a device invented by the ancient Egyptians, refined by the Greeks, and perfected by the Roman Empire. Cranes were built differently across Europe in the Middle Ages, but all followed the same principle. Using counterweights to lift and shift heavy objects, from the top of a tall wooden tower, the crane operator could hoist the stone blocks up to the level of the building being constructed. There, a team of men would direct the crane's movements precisely to drop the block into place. With each stone raised and lowered by the crane, the building rose a little taller. Over months and years, the result was spectacular. This wasn't easy work. The crane operator had to have a clear view of where the block would land. If anything obstructed his view, he couldn't do his job properly. He was usually assisted by a lookout on the building's highest occupied level, who could warn him of any approaching traffic or other obstacles, but it was difficult work for everyone involved. The men directing the crane had to call out instructions loudly enough to be heard over the crane's clattering gears, and they had to be quick to catch the block. If it came down faster than expected, if a block fell, it would not only damage the building below, it would kill anyone underneath it. So while constructing these grand buildings was an opportunity for individuals to demonstrate their skills and advance their careers, it was also a precarious business. One slip of the crane, one misdirected command, and a man might die. From the lowest quarry workers to the master builder, each person involved in the creation of a medieval cathedral or palace understood the importance of precision. Every block had to fit exactly where it was intended to go. No matter how rough the stone was when it arrived, the stonemason's skill lay in knowing how to shape it. Medieval stonemasons were artists first and foremost, and their canvas was the raw face of a mountain. Working at dizzying heights, these men sculpted vast surfaces with only a hammer and chisel, the simplest of tools. Yet with those simple tools, they created some of the most magnificent works of art in human history. From the towering figures of Notre Dame to the intricate facades of Salisbury Cathedral, the Masons created a permanent record of religious devotion and civic pride. They worked according to precise specifications dictated by the architect, following patterns of geometric designs and symbolic iconography that were meant to instruct and inspire the faithful. As the construction of these monuments to God progressed, layer by layer, the Mason's craft brought order to the world. Just as God created the universe from chaos, the Masons organized for all to see the face of the mountain into something beautiful and eternal. Today, when we look up at these great structures, we marvel at the Masons' skill, but we rarely understand the effort that went into creating them. Hundreds of thousands of stone blocks, each weighing several tons, were lifted to great heights and fitted together with breathtaking precision. How did they do it? In an age before modern technology, with no heavy machinery to assist them, the answer is with human hands and human minds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the men poured out of the portals of the construction site and into the bustling city. Some headed home to sleep in their beds, while others found lodging in the city's crowded taverns. Most were too poor to afford anything better, but none cared. They were young, strong, and full of vigor. They had done their best work in the daylight hours, and the night was for revelry. When the workday was done, the Masons became students and apprentices, sharing stories and learning from one another. In the dim lamplight, they talked about architecture and geometry, debated the merits of classical Rome versus contemporary France, and dreamed of faraway lands they'd never seen. They traded gossip about their employers, complaining about miserly abbots and extravagant counts and dukes. And when the wine flowed freely, they sang Bodhi songs and told jokes. All of them were young men, barely out of boyhood themselves, and life was good. They were building the great monuments of their age, and their labors would be recorded for posterity. These men knew that they were making history. They didn't know how or why, but someday their names would be forgotten, and all that would remain were the buildings they helped construct. Those buildings would stand as testaments to their efforts, and future generations would marvel at the artistry of the Masons who built them. And somewhere, high up on the walls of a great cathedral, the faint echo of their hammers and chisels would still ring true. Picture yourself as one of these stonemasons, your hands permanently stained gray with stone dust. Your fingernails packed with grit that no amount of washing will remove. Your palms are calloused from gripping chisels. Your arms ached from the constant hammering motion required to shape each block. The work is meditative in its repetitiveness, yet demanding in its precision. A mistake in measuring or cutting could waste days of work and expensive materials. More seriously, a structural error could endanger the entire project and the lives of everyone working on it. But what about the stink? How do you deal with the smell of stale waste clinging to your clothes, mixing with the grime of a month's worth of labor? For some lucky masons, an occasional bath in a village or nearby river might offer some relief. But for those committed to a long-term project, there might be weeks or even months between cleansing dips. And let's not forget the lice, those persistent little parasites that thrive in the close quarters of medieval workplaces. Even if the master masons didn't mind sharing their headgear, which they likely won't, these critters would happily make themselves at home in the thick, tangled mess of most European men's hair. Regular washing might help, but truly ridding oneself of these unwanted guests could require nothing less than shaving one's head completely. By the end of the episode, you'll understand what daily life was actually like for these hardworking medieval builders. We've created a series of videos that explores what it would really be like to live out the everyday lives of people in history. You get to decide whether you want to live in a castle or a cottage. Would you prefer to be a knight or a peasant? How about the life of an Egyptian scribe or an Aztec emperor? Which period of history and which social class would you choose? Leave your answers below and we might feature your comments in our upcoming episodes. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. The apprentice system that governs this work creates a hierarchy as rigid as the social structure of medieval society itself. Young boys, sometimes as young as 12 or 13, begin by carrying water, sweeping stone chips, and maintaining tools. They watch the master craftsman with careful attention, learning not through formal instruction, but through observation and gradual participation. Some boys will have been chosen for their aptitude with tools or for their ability to handle the physical demands of the work. Others will be the sons of masons, or have simply been brought to the building site by families hoping for work. Most will have had some schooling, enough to read and write basic Latin, although not necessarily their own vernacular language. This is not unusual for the time period. Medieval children rarely start work before 14 or 15 years old, and literacy was valued highly. Many will have attended a small school run by a local priest, although some wealthy families will hire private tutors to ensure their sons receive the best education possible. These tutors will focus heavily on religion, the central subject in medieval life, but will also cover grammar, rhetoric, music, geometry, and arithmetic. Some will learn some basic medicine and astronomy, and the wealthiest boys will study law and philosophy. While this might seem haphazard, this method of education was considered ideal for creating well-rounded men ready for any situation life might throw at them. It was also very practical. Not all of these subjects would prove necessary for the apprentice masons. Years pass before they are trusted to work on stones that will become part of the actual structure. A full apprenticeship might take 7 to 10 years, during which time the cathedral grows around them, becoming as familiar as their own homes. For the longest time, the apprentice's primary role will be helping the master masons. This could mean fetching tools or materials, cleaning up debris, or mixing mortar. Gradually, they will be allowed to participate in the shaping process, perhaps holding a stone in place while a master carves it, or striking a chisel with a small hammer. Over time, they will learn the secrets of the trade. The master masons guard their knowledge jealously, understanding that their expertise represents not just skill but economic survival. The ability to calculate the precise angles required for flying buttresses, to understand how weight distributes through stone arches, to know which stones can bear the greatest loads. This knowledge is passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. Some techniques are never written down, existing only in the practiced hands and experienced eyes of men who have spent decades working with stone. As the walls rise higher, the work becomes more dangerous. Wooden cranes, operated by men walking inside large wheel mechanisms like human hamsters, lift blocks of stone to dizzying heights. A rope failure, a moment of inattention, a weakened wooden beam could send tons of stone crashing down, taking workers with it. Accidents were common, and skilled craftsmen often bore the permanent marks of their trade. Missing fingers from chisel slips, bent backs from years of heavy lifting, scars from falling debris. In the winter months, work slows dramatically, not just because of the cold and shortened daylight, but because mortar will not set properly in freezing temperatures. The masons might retreat to covered workshops where they could continue shaping stones for use when construction resumed in the spring. This seasonal ebb and flow meant that major projects stretched over many more years than the actual working time would suggest. Medieval cathedrals took decades to complete, and that was with multiple teams of masons working at once. These magnificent structures, testaments to human ingenuity and devotion, were constructed from the sweat, toil, and often blood of thousands of individuals. Each block carefully fitted into place, each arch and vault a testament to the skill of the master masons. Their creation would serve as a constant reminder of the power of God, but also of the dedication of those who built it. And let's not forget the resources needed to construct these massive buildings. Cathedrals required immense quantities of materials, including millions of kilograms of stone, not to mention the countless tons of mortar, wood, and iron. Quarrying the stone would have been a labor-intensive process involving skilled workers who understood the properties of different types of stone and how to extract them efficiently. Then there's transportation. Moving the massive blocks of stone to the building site would have been a logistical challenge, requiring specialized equipment and manpower. Without modern tools and machinery, everything had to be done by hand or with animal power, making the entire process even more arduous. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of constructing a medieval cathedral is the sheer precision required. Every stone had to be cut and shaped accurately to fit with the others, and the slightest miscalculation could have disastrous consequences. Master masons were responsible for ensuring that the structure was stable and secure, and they had to have an intimate knowledge of the building plans and engineering principles. This level of precision was not just a matter of skill, but also of planning and organization. Teams of masons worked together in a highly coordinated fashion to ensure that each stone was laid in the right place at the right time. Moreover, the construction of a medieval cathedral was a communal effort involving not just masons, but also carpenters, quarrymen, crane operators, scaffold builders, and many others. It was a microcosm of medieval society, bringing together people from different social classes and backgrounds to work towards a common goal. Finally, let's not forget the dedication and perseverance required to complete such a massive undertaking. Constructing a medieval cathedral was a long-term commitment, often spanning several generations. Masons and other workers had to endure years of back-breaking labor in often hazardous conditions. They were exposed to the elements, and accidents were common. Yet they persevered, driven by a combination of economic necessity, religious devotion, and civic pride. The construction of a medieval cathedral was a monumental achievement, a testament to the power of human ingenuity and collaboration. It required the combined efforts of countless individuals working over the course of many years to create a structure that would serve as a beacon of faith and a symbol of community for generations to come. So next time you see a medieval cathedral, take a moment to appreciate the incredible effort and precision that went into its construction. And remember the skilled workers who made it possible. Cathedrals took decades to build, creating a building culture all their own. In the 12th century, construction began on a new cathedral in a French city. Like many such projects, it was begun with great fanfare. Officials and clergy paraded to the site to turn the first stones, a symbolic beginning of a project that would take many lifetimes to complete. But as the cathedral takes shape, something remarkable happens. The building begins to develop its own community, its own culture, its own traditions. Workers who began as strangers become bound together by shared purpose and mutual dependence. They develop their own slang, their own jokes, their own ways of commemorating milestones in the construction. When a major section is completed, an arch closed, a tower topped off, a window installed, there are celebrations that blend religious gratitude with craftsman's pride. The commoners of the city take notice and songs are composed celebrating the masons at work. Bards traveling between cities will stop and stay a while, finding inspiration in the monumental effort and composing songs that spread news and stories of the building project far and wide. The cathedral becomes more than a building, becomes a character in its own right, shaping the lives of everyone involved in its creation. When it comes to cathedrals, we usually focus on the magnificent end product: soaring vaults, flying buttresses, stained glass windows, and intricately carved portals. But what really makes these buildings so special is the story of how they came to be. Behind the hard angles of medieval stonework, there's a human drama that's often overlooked. A world of sweat and sawdust, of close calls and narrow escapes, of triumphs celebrated and tragedies mourned. To understand how cathedrals were built is to understand the societies that created them, people, their culture, their values, and their dreams. The sheer scale of cathedral building projects made them natural focal points for any medieval city. Construction sites were often the largest gatherings of people, the greatest concentrations of wealth, and the most dramatic displays of civic pride. At the same time, the complexity of the work required specialization, organization, and a high degree of cooperation. Cathedrals were not just the tallest, grandest buildings in the city, they were the busiest too. So let's take a break from the finished product and spend some time at the construction site. The first thing you'd notice is the noise. Medieval masons worked with the precision and care that their demanding craft required. Most of the time, they didn't shout or bang their tools down in frustration. Rather, they developed an almost musical language of controlled, precise movements. The only shouts you'd hear would be for safety, warning colleagues of danger, or celebrating a successful lift or lowered stone. At times, though, there would be a cacophony of sound, as massive timbers were maneuvered into place, or a stone fell from a great height, sending a shower of smaller stones and dust raining down over the worksite. And then there was the ringing of bells. Cathedrals were meant to be centers of religious life, and those bells called the faithful to prayer and marked the rhythm of each day. But even before the bells were installed in their towers, there was the sound of hammers and chisels working on the bronze and foundries throughout the region. The second thing you'd notice was the smell. Wood smoke rising from small fires used for heating and cooking, mingled with the scent of sawdust, mortar, and fresh-cut stone. There would be the reek of stale waste too, and the sweet cloying stench of sickness from time to time. But mostly, there would be the smell of humanity. The smell of people working hard, living close to their craft, eating heartily, and sweating profusely. If you happened to be there on a market day, you might catch the scent of spices or baking bread wafting over from the nearby stalls. The smells of the city itself, of stables, of sewage and unwashed bodies, would also drift into the construction site, carried on the wind or by the many workers who commuted from their homes each day. To see how cathedrals were built, you'd have to start with their voices. Because of their size, cathedrals had to be constructed with internal supports to keep the walls from collapsing. These were either in the form of pillars and piers, or later, arches and vaults. With the advent of ribbed vaults, cathedrals could be built taller and grander than ever before. This innovation allowed builders to construct enormous spaces without the need for extensive use of pillars and piers, thus providing more clear floor space for worshippers. But all of this internal structure was useless. Without a way to fill the resulting triangular gaps between the vertical supports, that's why every cathedral required a certain amount of stained glass, the art form perfectly suited to bridge the divide between architecture and adornment. These windows wouldn't just add beauty to the interior, they'd help define the structural limits of the building. No matter how grandly decorated, stained glass was fragile and couldn't stand alone. It had to be carefully placed within the architect's framework. As the cathedral neared completion, the bells would be installed in their towers. This would require its own specialized knowledge. The bell towers must be engineered not just to support the weight of the bells, but to withstand the dynamic forces created when they swing. A large bell in motion generates tremendous sideways pressure that could crack stone or topple a poorly designed tower. The master builders must understand both the architectural requirements of bell hanging and the acoustic properties that will allow the sound to carry properly across the city. This is where the stonemason's work intersects with that of other specialized craftsmen. The bronze founders who will cast the bells work closely with the architects to ensure that the towers will accommodate bells of the desired size and number. The rope makers who will provide the pulling systems must coordinate with the carpenters who build the wooden frameworks from which the bells will hang. Every element of the cathedral must work in harmony, from the foundation stones to the bronze voices that will eventually call the faithful to prayer. Much of the work involved in constructing a medieval cathedral required skill and knowledge passed down through generations of craftsmen. The most important of these specialists were the stonemasons, who not only shaped the raw materials, they also read the plans and made sure that each stone was placed precisely where it needed to be. But because cathedrals were so massive, no single mason could oversee the entire project. Instead, teams of masons led by a master builder worked on one section at a time, laying out courses of stones, cutting and fitting them, raising them into place, and adding finishing touches. Because of the immense scale of the project, a single team of masons might work on a single bay or pier for weeks or even months. Stonemasons, like most medieval trades, were organized into guilds. Each guild had its own set of rules and regulations that governed how its members could practice their craft. In addition to setting standards for quality, these rules often included provisions for training apprentices and ensuring that the rights of workers were protected. The rules also established the hierarchy of the trade, with master builders at the top, followed by journeymen and then apprentices. Women, while excluded from the physical construction work, played essential supporting roles. They prepared meals for the workers, maintained the temporary structures where tools were stored, and often managed the complex logistics of material supply. Some became skilled in crafts that supported the construction, weaving the heavy ropes needed for lifting, preparing the specialized mortar required for different types of stonework, or maintaining the intricate records that tracked material purchases and worker payments. The time scale of cathedral construction created unique social dynamics. A master mason might begin work on a project as a young man and continue until his death, training multiple generations of apprentices who would carry on his work. Some workers might spend their entire careers on a single building, watching their own children grow up in the shadow of rising stone walls. Cathedral became not just their workplace, but the defining feature of their lives, the constant presence around which everything else revolved. Cathedrals are more than just buildings. They're monuments to the human spirit, to our desire to reach toward the heavens and create something beautiful and lasting. They're also a testament to the power of community, to what can be accomplished when people work together toward a common goal. So the next time you look up at a cathedral, remember the people. Who built it? The stonemasons, the carpenters, the glazers, the sculptors, the painters, the architects, all of them working together to create something truly special, something that would inspire awe and wonder for centuries to come. Cathedrals consumed so many resources and took so long to build that they required their own bureaucracy. The builders of Notre Dame worked for decades under an appointed treasurer, whose duty it was to manage the finances of the project. What's more, the money to build it came from a whole host of different sources. From wealthy patrons to the church's general revenues, to special taxes levied on parishioners and donations from the faithful every time they passed the collection plate. And lest we forget, these cathedrals were built during the Middle Ages, when accounting was basically synonymous with bureaucracy, meaning that the people keeping track of all this money did and actually have much opportunity to see what it was funding. The records of these financial transactions were kept by clerks who rarely, if ever, set foot on the construction site. They meticulously recorded every payment made, every material purchased, every laborer hired and fired. Thanks to these records, we know exactly how much Notre Dame cost. Well, sort of. In 2019 dollars, the construction of Notre Dame would run into the hundreds of millions. That is enough money to make the cost of building one of these great. Churches spread out over several decades feel like the equivalent of a single individual. It's pledging to save up and spend $500,000 in today's money on a really elaborate house. Only it wasn't just one person making that pledge, but the entire community. Generations of parishioners were collectively investing their treasure, their time, and their hopes in the construction of Notre Dame. When it comes to building cathedrals, size does matter. Bigger buildings cost more money and take longer to construct, but they also bring in more revenue and tend to get more donations. Building something big is expensive, but it's also a powerful way of extracting money from other people. Even after controlling for inflation, bigger churches simply cost more money. Not surprisingly, the cost of building a church correlated closely with its volume. Since constructing a larger space meant laying more foundations, erecting more walls, installing more windows, and covering everything with more roofing. But these economic realities only tell part of the story. We can't understand why churches got so big without understanding how they were getting that big. Churches in the Middle Ages were not built all at once, but rather in stages. Construction of a new church might begin modestly with the laying of the cornerstone and the construction of the choir, the area where the clergy stands and sings during services. Once the choir was complete, construction would move to the nave, the main area of the church where the congregation sits. From there, the builders would construct one side aisle at a time, followed by the other. It was during the construction of these aisles the cathedrals started to expand in size, since additional side aisles meant more space for worshipers and thus more money coming in. And of course, the more aisles a church had, the grander it looked, which encouraged still more donations. Eventually, the builders would repeat the process on the other side of the choir, mirroring the aisles on the opposite end. This expansion of a church's footprint explains why so many churches look like elongated Latin eyes from above, but it doesn't explain how they got so tall. That's because each time a new aisle was added, the builders would also increase the height of the nave, creating a sort of competition between the aisles to reach ever higher. Today, visitors experience the soaring heights of a finished cathedral. But they do unusually notice that it's really a series of gradually improving approximations reaching towards the heavens. Once the basic structure of the aisles was complete, construction crews would then fill in the interior space with decorative elements, culminating in the installation of windows. We often think of stained glass windows as being the defining feature of a great Gothic cathedral, but they were usually installed near the very end of the construction process, shortly before the building was ready to be formally consecrated and turned over to the clergy. And yet, despite the fact that the stained glass windows are one of the most iconic features of a great Gothic cathedral, in some ways they were the least important. Why? Because the windows are purely decorative, they serve no structural purpose, and they weren't even present during the majority of the construction process. During construction, the interior of a cathedral would look drastically different since scaffolding would be up, and the spaces between the floor and the ceiling would be filled with wooden platforms used by workers. Windows would have been installed in plain stone frames and covered with wooden shutters for protection. As such, those who worked on building the cathedral wouldn't have been able to appreciate the decorative beauty of their handiwork, or the play of colors that would eventually fill the interior with light. To them, it would just be a building site. The people who donated money to the construction of a cathedral rarely saw the building process either. For most donors, the closest they'd get to the construction site would be walking past it on their way to Mass. Thus, the stained glass windows served both an aesthetic and a symbolic function. They allowed the people who made the greatest sacrifices to beautify their place of worship, and they created a beautiful interior for visitors to marvel at, encouraging them to donate. But even after the windows were installed, the construction of a cathedral wasn't finished. There was still one last thing to put in: the bells. When the bell installation was complete, a large crowd would gather to watch as workers maneuvered the giant bronze instruments into place using the same human-powered cranes that had raised the stone blocks. But unlike stone, bells could not be replaced easily if damaged. The installation of a bell was a risky undertaking, requiring perfect coordination and absolute precision. If something went wrong, the consequences would be catastrophic. At Notre Dame, the bell installation was particularly fraught, since 4 of the 5 bells weighed several tons. Moving these heavy objects around was already difficult enough on a flat surface, but raising them vertically through a narrow opening presented a unique set of challenges. On June 13, 1210, Parisians watched anxiously as 2 bells were lowered into the North Tower. The bells were to be placed one on top of the other, and if even a small portion of the upper bell brushed against the framework of the opening, it could have been ruined. Fortunately, the operation was successful, and the bells were rung to celebrate. The bells of Notre Dame were a source of civic pride and a powerful religious symbol. They were designed not just to call worshippers to prayer, but to announce royal coronations, victories over enemies, and other important events. In medieval Paris, the ringing of Notre Dame's bells was an audible manifestation of political power. When the bells were first rung after their installation, it marked not just the completion of a building, but the culmination of generations of human effort. The sound that filled the air carried with it the labor of countless hands, the expertise of master craftsmen, the dreams of architects who had died decades before, and the faith of a community that had invested its treasure and time in something larger than any individual life. But even as the cathedral was completed, the work was not finished. Today, visitors can climb the spiral stairs leading to the bell ringer's platform and stand on the worn stones where men have climbed for centuries. Many of these steps were probably shaped by the feet of bell ringers who lived long before the days of tourism. In medieval Paris, climbing the stairs to the bell ringer's platform was a physically demanding job. Each bell weighed several tons, and it took considerable strength and skill to ring them properly. Consequently, the bell ringers were often young, athletic men who would climb the stairs multiple times a day. Their shoes would leave deep grooves in the stone, which would then be smoothed and worn down by countless other pairs of feet. In a sense, those grooves are a kind of record left behind by the laborers who built and maintained Notre Dame. Similar scenes played out in cathedrals across Europe. As churches, monasteries, and other buildings were constructed, repaired, and adapted over the centuries, these structures were made of living materials, meaning that they required constant maintenance and readjustment. Over time, wind, rain, and temperature changes caused the stones to shift, crack, and settle. Mortars would wear away and needed to be reapplied. Carvings would become eroded and needed to be restored. Just as a living body requires medical care, a stone building required the ministrations of skilled hands. The masons who built the great cathedrals of Europe often became their caretakers as well. When a master craftsman died, his son would usually take over the business. This meant that the family would continue to receive payments for maintaining the cathedral that they had helped to build. What's more, these jobs required specialized knowledge. Since the materials used in construction were so expensive and difficult to come by, it was critical to know exactly where each piece came from and how it fit together. A broken window or a cracked bell demanded immediate attention, since the cost of replacing them would be ruinous. Thus, the families of masons who worked on these buildings developed intimate knowledge about the structures that they maintained. They knew which walls settled slightly over time, which joints needed regular remortaring, which architectural elements were most vulnerable to weather damage. This practical knowledge ensured that the cathedrals would remain standing for centuries. In the Middle Ages, the lifespan of a stone building was essentially limitless. So long as it received regular maintenance, a building could theoretically remain in use indefinitely. But this didn't mean that it was immune to change. New windows, doors, and other architectural elements were sometimes added, transforming the appearance of a building over time. Cathedrals are therefore simultaneously timeless and dynamic, combining the permanence of stone with the mutability of human endeavor. As the bell ringer who eventually climbed those spiral stairs was inheriting not just a job, but a position within a centuries-long tradition of human dedication. Those worn stone steps had been shaped not just by the feet of bell ringers, but by the workers who had built them, the craftsmen who had maintained them, and the countless others who had climbed them in service to something greater than themselves. Tonight, we journey back to medieval France, to a world of soaring cathedrals and shadowy towers. Our tale follows a young bell ringer employed in maintaining the bells of a grand cathedral. His days are long, his tasks are solitary, and the ancient building's verticality holds many secrets. Let us join him as he prepares for a night of rest in his small room nestled within the tower. He moves with the practiced grace of one who has scaled these heights countless times. Each turn of the winding stairs is imprinted on his memory, each crack and crevice of the ancient stone familiar to his touch. Reaching his modest chamber, he performs his nightly rituals. He washes in a basin of water that catches the last rays of daylight, his rough hands growing soft from the contact. He eats his simple supper, its flavors dull compared to the bustle of the market square. And then, as twilight deepens, he turns to his most cherished possession, a small collection of books. Among these volumes is a compilation of maps, plans, and descriptions of cathedrals throughout France. This book, more than any other, captures his imagination. In its yellowed pages, he finds not just technical instructions, but glimpses of lives lived within the tower's silent embrace. Some of these sketches depict cathedrals that he has seen, their familiar silhouettes bringing back the echoes of distant chimes. But others show structures that remain only in his memory, remnants of medieval engineering prowess that crumbled long ago. These silent witnesses of a vanished past speak to him across the chasm of centuries, reminding him that his own work contributes to a lineage of builders stretching back into the mists of time. One particular entry captures his attention, describes a cathedral he has never seen, its hidden spaces detailed with a precision that hints at an intimate knowledge of its structure. Intrigued, he packs a lantern and prepares for exploration. Today, he's not just a bell ringer maintaining his post. He is a student of medieval architecture, venturing into uncharted territory. His climb is slow, deliberate, and sure-footed. Every step echoes the countless ascents before him. As he reaches higher levels, the air grows colder, the silence deeper. He pauses, listening intently. The faintest toll of a distant bell seems to resonate within his bones. He continues upward, drawn by a force he cannot name, until he reaches a place where no bell ringer has gone before. Here, amid the cathedral's silent sanctum, he discovers a series of narrow, discernible pathways leading into the thickness of the stone walls. These passages, invisible to casual observation, are the key to the cathedral's hidden topography. With a mix of trepidation and excitement, he enters the labyrinth of stone corridors. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the flickering beam of his lantern. The air is stale, heavy with the scent of ages past. He reaches out, touching the damp stone, feeling the coolness seep into his fingertips. The passages twist and turn, defying any sense of logical order. He moves deeper, the silence pressing in on him from all sides. The cathedral, once a symbol of divine grandeur, now feels like a subterranean labyrinth. His lantern casts grotesque shadows that dance and writhe around him, transforming familiar shapes into menacing phantoms. He hears a sudden drip of water, each drop echoing in the vast emptiness. He quickens his pace, eager to reach the end of this subterranean journey. And then, through a crack in the wall, he sees a faint glimmer of light. Emerging into a hidden chamber, he is greeted by a sight that takes his breath away. Before him stretches a vast expanse of space, untouched by the prying eyes of centuries. In the center stands a simple wooden table, its surface smooth from countless touches. On it rests a collection of objects that hint at lives lived here long ago. A worn leather pouch, a set of rosary beads, a faded piece of fabric that may have once been a banner. Here, in this forgotten corner of the cathedral, he feels the presence of those who came before him. As he explores further, he finds a narrow window high on the wall. Through it, he gazes out at the city below, its rooftops a patchwork quilt spread out beneath the fading sky. In this moment, he understands that he is not just a bell ringer or an explorer. He is a link in a chain connecting him to the countless souls who have sought refuge, solace, or communion within these very walls. Suddenly, the stillness is broken by a faint scratching sound. He freezes, listening intently. The noise comes again, accompanied by the rustle of wings. From the corner of his eye, he sees a small bird fluttering nearby. Startled, he watches as it perches on the window ledge, its presence a reminder of the world outside this timeless sanctuary. As the night deepens, he feels a sense of peace settle over him. The cathedral, with its secrets and whispers, has embraced him as one of its own. The boundary between the sacred and the profane blurs. In this hidden space, he is neither worker nor observer. He is a participant in a timeless ritual that transcends centuries. With renewed purpose, he begins to sketch the chamber and its contents, committing this secret place to paper for future reference. He traces the contours of the table, the arrangement of the objects, the pattern of light and shadow on the floor. In these lines and curves, he captures not just the physical space, but the essence of what it means to be a bell ringer in this ancient cathedral. As dawn approaches, he retraces his steps through the labyrinthine passages, each turn bringing him closer to the familiar chime of bells. Emerging into the rising sun, he feels changed. The cathedral, once a place of solemn duty, now holds a deeper significance for him. He knows that within its towering heights, there exists a hidden world that defies the passage of time. From that day forward, his life is divided between the public face of the cathedral and the secret spaces he has discovered. He becomes both guide and guardian, sharing his knowledge with those he trusts, while ensuring that the sanctity of the hidden places remains undisturbed. The cathedral, once a solitary workplace, now resonates with the echoes of unseen companions. Hears the phantom footsteps of those who walked these paths before him. Their presence, a silent chorus, accompanying his own journey. In the quiet hours, when the cathedral is empty of worshippers, he finds solace in the company of the stones. He leans against the cool surface of the walls, feeling the wisdom of centuries seep into his very being. The roughness of the stone contrasts with the smoothness of his calloused hands, a tactile reminder of the passage of time. As he looks out over the city, he sees not just the familiar streets and rooftops, but the ghosts of lives lived long ago. He imagines medieval processions winding through the crowds, hears the murmur of voices from a bygone era. The cathedral, once a symbol of divine power, now feels like a bridge to the past. When he climbs the endless stairs, he does so knowing that each step carries him not just toward his work, but deeper into the heart of the cathedral. With each ascent, he feels a sense of exhilaration, of oneness with the structure itself.
Now, as your mind settles deeper into this medieval world, let us venture into the hidden spaces that existed within these soaring structures, the forgotten chambers, the secret passages, the mysterious rooms that were never mentioned in official records, but were known intimately to those who spent their lives climbing the cathedral's spiral stairs. These were the spaces where the sacred and the profane intersected, where human needs found expression even within the most holy of environments. The bell ringers, more than anyone else, knew the cathedral's secrets, while pilgrims and parishioners saw only the public faces of these great buildings, the soaring naves, the jeweled windows, the carved altars the bell ringers' daily journeys up and down. Those worn stone steps revealed a different architecture entirely. Hidden within the thick walls, carved into forgotten corners, built into the spaces between what was planned and what was possible, lay a shadow cathedral known only to those whose work required them to explore every vertical foot of the structure. Picture yourself discovering these hidden spaces for the first time. Perhaps you are still new to your position, still learning the geography of your vertical world, when you notice something unusual. There, in the curve of the spiral staircase, where the steps are worn most deeply, your trailing hand touches not smooth stone, but the edge of an opening. A closer examination in the dim light, filtering down from above, reveals a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, leading away from the main staircase into the thickness of the wall itself. These passages were not accidents of construction. Medieval builders, working within the constraints of massive stone walls that might be 8 or 10 feet thick, often created internal circulation systems that allowed movement through the building without using the main public spaces. Some of these passages connected different levels of the cathedral, providing service routes for maintenance work. Others led to small chambers built into the walls themselves, spaces that served purposes both practical and mysterious. One type of hidden chamber you might discover would be the anchorite cell's small rooms where religious hermits lived in voluntary imprisonment, dedicating their lives to prayer and contemplation within the very walls of the cathedral. These spaces, typically no larger than a modern prison cell, contained everything necessary for a life of extreme simplicity. A stone slab for sleeping, a small niche for personal possessions, and often a narrow window that looked not outward to the world, but inward to the main altar of the cathedral. The anchorites who occupied these cells represented one of the most extreme forms of medieval religious devotion. They underwent a ceremony that was essentially a funeral for their worldly lives, after which they were sealed into their chambers, with only a small window for receiving food and a smaller opening for waste removal. Some remained in these spaces for decades, becoming living saints, whose presence was believed to bless the entire cathedral. Their quiet prayers, whispered continuously in their stone cells, were thought to rise with the sound of the bells, creating a constant stream of intercession that protected the community. As a bell ringer, you might occasionally hear these whispered prayers echoing through the stone passages. As you made your way to the bell chamber, the sound would be barely audible, more felt than heard, but it would remind you that your own solitary work was part of a larger network of solitary devotions taking place within the cathedral's hidden spaces. Other chambers served more practical purposes, though these too carried their own mysteries. Storage rooms built into the walls held not just rope and tools for bell maintenance, but also treasures that the cathedral accumulated over decades or centuries. Religious relics too valuable or too fragile for public display might be kept in these hidden spaces, wrapped in silk and stored in wooden boxes that slowly absorbed the scent of stone and age. Some of these storage chambers contain surprising archives collections of documents that recorded not just official church business, but the private thoughts and concerns of cathedral workers across generations. Bell ringers, often among the few literate members of the cathedral's working community, sometimes kept informal records of their experiences. These might include notes about bell maintenance, observations about unusual weather patterns that affected the bell's sound, or even personal reflections on the strange isolation of their calling. You might discover, carved directly into the stone walls of these hidden chambers, graffiti left by your predecessors. Medieval graffiti was remarkably sophisticated, often including not just names and dates, but elaborate prayers, complaints about working conditions, or even crude jokes shared among workers. Some cathedral towers contain stone surfaces covered with centuries of these informal inscriptions, creating an underground literature of medieval working life that was never intended to survive, but has proven more durable than many official documents. The most intriguing graffiti often appeared in the most hidden spaces, where workers felt safe to express thoughts they would never dare voice publicly. Complaints about corrupt church officials, expressions of doubt about religious doctrine, or simply the universal human need to leave some mark of individual existence within the overwhelming anonymity of medieval life. As a bell ringer exploring these spaces, you would become an accidental archaeologist, discovering the private thoughts of men who lived and worked centuries before you, but who faced many of the same daily frustrations and spiritual questions. Some hidden chambers contained evidence of rituals that were never officially sanctioned by the church, but were nonetheless tolerated as necessary outlets for human needs. Medieval Christianity, despite its official emphasis on spiritual purity, recognized that people working in isolation for extended periods required some accommodation for their psychological well-being. Small shrines dedicated to saints who were not officially recognized, offerings left by workers seeking protection from the dangers of their trade, or even simple social gatherings that took place in the hidden spaces away from official supervision. The discovery of these informal religious practices reveals how the rigid structure of medieval Christianity was softened by human necessity. Workers who spent their days surrounded by official religious art and architecture created their own, more personal expressions of faith in the hidden spaces of the buildings they maintained. These might include simple wooden crosses carved by hand, collections of smooth stones arranged in patterns that held personal meaning, or even small gardens grown in chambers that received enough light from narrow windows. One particularly mysterious type of hidden chamber was the scriptorium annex, small rooms connected to the main scriptoriums where books were copied, but used for projects that were kept separate from official church business. Some of these spaces contained evidence of intellectual activity that pushed against the boundaries of acceptable medieval thought. Astronomical calculations that contradicted church doctrine about the nature of the heavens, copies of classical texts that were officially discouraged, or original writings that explored philosophical questions in ways that might be considered heretical if discovered by church authorities. Bell ringers, because of their unique access to all levels of the cathedral and their relative freedom from direct supervision, sometimes became informal custodians of these intellectual secrets. They might be asked to carry messages between scholars, to deliver books to hidden chambers, or simply to keep quiet about activities they observed during their daily climbs through the cathedral's vertical maze. The acoustic properties of these hidden spaces created their own mysteries. Sound behaved strangely within the thick stone walls, creating unexpected echoes and resonances that could carry whispered conversations across great distances or concentrate sounds in ways that seemed supernatural. Some chambers were positioned so that they naturally amplified sounds from the main cathedral, allowing occupants to hear services or conversations that were meant to be private. Other spaces seemed to absorb sound completely, creating pockets of absolute silence that were both peaceful and unsettling. These acoustic phenomena contributed to the folklore that surrounded cathedral towers. Stories of ghostly voices, unexplained music, or conversations that seemed to come from empty rooms were often the result of sound traveling through hidden passages in unexpected ways. As a bell ringer, you would gradually learn to distinguish between these natural acoustic effects and the sounds of actual human activity, but the process of learning would involve many moments of uncertainty about what you were hearing and where it was coming from. The temperature variations within hidden chambers created their own microenvironments within the cathedral's structure. Some spaces, particularly those that received direct sunlight through small windows, could become surprisingly warm even in winter. Others, especially those deep within the stone walls, maintained a constant cool temperature year-round. These temperature differences created air currents that moved through the hidden passage systems, carrying scents and sounds in ways that seemed almost magical to medieval minds. Certain chambers were specifically designed to take advantage of these air currents for practical purposes. Rooms used for food storage were positioned where cool air would help preserve supplies. Spaces intended for human occupation were located where warming air currents would provide some comfort during cold weather. The builders of these cathedrals possessed an intuitive understanding of airflow and thermal dynamics that allowed them to create complex environmental systems using only passive techniques. Some of the most intriguing hidden spaces were those that seemed to serve no clear practical purpose chambers that were too small for storage, too isolated for regular human occupation, too awkwardly positioned for structural necessity. These mysterious rooms have generated countless theories among modern scholars. Some suggest they were built as hiding places during times of political or military danger. Others believe they served ritualistic purposes that are no longer understood. Still others think they were simply the result of construction quirks, spaces left over when architectural plans were modified during the building process. The psychological impact of discovering and exploring these hidden spaces would be profound for anyone who spent significant time in the cathedral towers. The knowledge that you were moving through a landscape that contained so many secrets, so much hidden history, would create a sense of connection to the countless individuals who had worked and lived within these walls over the centuries. Every hidden chamber you discovered would represent not just architectural curiosity, but human stories that were now lost to official history. The preservation of objects within these hidden spaces provides modern archaeologists with invaluable insights into medieval daily life. Items that were considered too ordinary to preserve officially worked tools. Personal possessions, simple furniture, survived in hidden chambers when they were forgotten or deliberately concealed. These objects tell stories about the practical realities of medieval cathedral life that no official document records. Religious objects found in hidden chambers often differ significantly from those displayed publicly in the cathedral. They tend to be more personal, more idiosyncratic, reflecting individual spiritual needs rather than official doctrine. Hand-carved wooden figures, improvised altars, collections of stones, or other natural objects arranged for devotional purposes. These discoveries reveal how medieval people adapted official religious practices to their personal circumstances and psychological needs. The evidence of literacy found in hidden chambers suggests that cathedral workers were often more educated than official records indicate. Inscriptions in Latin, copies of religious texts, and even original writings demonstrate that knowledge was more widely distributed among working-class cathedral employees than the formal education system would suggest. Bell ringers, in particular, seem to have maintained informal networks for sharing books, ideas, and written correspondence that operated parallel to official church communication systems. As you explore these hidden spaces in your imagination, consider the profound solitude experienced by those who knew these secrets. To be aware of the cathedral's hidden geography was to carry knowledge that could not be shared casually, to move through spaces that connected you to generations of previous workers, while simultaneously isolating you from your contemporaries. The bell ringer's life was already solitary, but knowledge of the cathedral's secrets added another dimension to that isolation, the weight of being a keeper of mysteries that were both sacred and deeply human. The seasonal changes that affected the main cathedral spaces were magnified in the hidden chambers. Condensation formed and disappeared according to temperature variations that followed patterns established by the building's orientation and the thermal properties of stone. Some chambers became nearly uninhabitable during certain seasons, while others provided refuge from extreme weather. Learning to navigate these seasonal changes was part of mastering the cathedral's hidden geography. The intersection of the sacred and the mundane within these hidden spaces reflects the complexity of medieval religious life, even within buildings dedicated entirely to spiritual purposes. Human needs asserted themselves in ways that required accommodation. The hidden chambers represent a kind of negotiation between official religious ideals and practical human reality, spaces where the two could coexist without explicit conflict. As your mind settles into sleep tonight, imagine yourself as that medieval bell ringer, returning to your small stone chamber after a day of discovery within your cathedral's hidden spaces. Your head would be full of the echoes and shadows you had encountered. Your hands would still tingle from touching stones carved by unknown predecessors, and your heart would carry the weight of secrets that connected you to centuries of human experience within those towering walls. Tomorrow you would wake to ring the bells again, but now your daily climbs would carry new meaning, for you would know that each step took you not just toward your work, but deeper into a mystery that was both architectural and profoundly human. As the evening settles around you and your mind continues its journey through medieval cathedral life, let us descend now from the harsh realities of the bell tower to explore a world that existed within the same stone walls, but might as well have been on another continent. While you, as the bell ringer, climbed those cold spiral stairs with calloused hands and aching legs, others moved through these same sacred spaces, wrapped in silk and wool, their paths lit by beeswax candles, their concerns focused not on rope burns and bronze maintenance, but on the intricate politics of spiritual authority and temporal power. Picture yourself observing, from your lonely perch in the bell chamber, the evening rituals of the cathedral's upper hierarchy. As the last light of day filters through the stained glass windows far below, a different kind of day is ending in the bishop's private quarters. These spaces, built into the most comfortable and well-appointed sections of the cathedral complex, represent a world of medieval luxury that contrasts sharply with the austere conditions experienced by those who performed the manual labor that kept the cathedral functioning. The bishop's private study, illuminated by the warm glow of multiple candles, creates an atmosphere of scholarly contemplation that stands in marked contrast to the harsh functionality of the bell chamber above. The room itself reflects centuries of accumulated comfort. Thick tapestries hang from stone walls that have been smoothed and painted, their cold surfaces softened by expensive fabrics imported from distant lands. The floor, rather than bare stone, is covered with rushes that are changed regularly, and sometimes even with rare carpets that represent wealth beyond the comprehension of most medieval people. In this warm, fragrant space, the bishop settles into his evening routine with a deliberateness that speaks to a life organized around intellectual and spiritual pursuits rather than physical labor. His day has been spent not in climbing stairs or pulling ropes, but in the complex negotiations required to maintain religious authority in a world where spiritual and political power intertwined in ways that demanded constant attention and sophisticated understanding. The bishop's evening attire reflects his status with every thread. His robes, made from the finest wool available, are dyed in colors that were luxury items in themselves, deep purples that came from Mediterranean shellfish, rich reds derived from expensive insects, blues created through processes that required rare materials and specialized knowledge. The fabric is soft against his skin, lined with silk or fine linen that has been blessed and perfumed with incense. His hands, unlike yours with their rope burns and stone cuts, are soft and clean, bearing only the calluses that come from holding quill pens and turning manuscript pages. The contrast extends to every aspect of his physical experience, while you feel the constant ache of tired muscles and the bite of cold stone against your palms. The bishop moves through spaces designed for comfort and contemplation. His private chapel, attached to his study, contains furniture specifically crafted for extended periods of prayer and meditation. Kneeling cushions stuffed with down, armrests positioned at precisely the right height to support hours of devotion without physical discomfort. The books that surround him in his study represent another form of wealth that was perhaps more valuable than gold in medieval times. Each manuscript has been copied by hand, often requiring months or years of work by skilled scribes. The illuminated letters that decorate these texts are painted with gold leaf and pigments that cost small fortunes. Some of these books contain knowledge that exists nowhere else in the world. Copies of classical texts, theological treatises, scientific observations, and philosophical arguments that represent the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The bishop's evening reading is illuminated by candles made from beeswax rather than the tallow candles used in less prestigious spaces. Beeswax burns cleaner and brighter, producing none of the smoky, unpleasant odor of animal fat candles. The light they provide is steady and warm, creating ideal conditions for the close work of reading and writing that occupies much of the bishop's time. The candles themselves are often decorated, carved with religious symbols or scenes that make even these utilitarian objects into works of art. The food that arrives at his table reflects the same attention to comfort and quality that governs every other aspect of his environment. While you, as the bell ringer, might eat simple bread and thin soup, often cold because your schedule conflicts with meal times, the bishop's dinner is a carefully orchestrated affair. Fresh bread baked daily in cathedral ovens, wine selected from the best vineyards, meat that has been properly aged and prepared by skilled cooks who understand the arts of seasoning and presentation. The bishop's meals are served on plates made from precious metals or fine ceramics, items that represent significant investments, but also symbols of status that communicate his position within the ecclesiastical hierarchy. The wine is served in goblets that may be made from silver or even gold, and the water provided for washing his hands between courses is scented with herbs and warmed to the perfect temperature. But perhaps the most significant contrast lies not in physical comfort, but in the nature of the responsibilities that occupy the bishop's time. While your concerns focus on the immediate and practical, will the ropes hold? Are the bells properly tuned? Can you make the climb in time for the next canonical hour? The bishop's mental energy is devoted to questions that span decades or centuries. He corresponds with other bishops across Europe, participating in theological debates that may take years to resolve. He manages vast estates that provide the economic foundation for the cathedral's operations, making decisions about agriculture, trade, and investment that will affect generations of people. The political dimensions of the bishop's role require a sophistication that would be entirely foreign to someone whose life is structured around the simple rhythms of bell ringing. Medieval bishops were not just religious leaders, but temporal rulers who controlled significant territories, commanded their own military forces, and participated in the complex web of alliances and conflicts that characterized medieval politics. The correspondence that arrives daily at the bishop's study includes not just religious matters, but reports from estate managers, requests from political allies, and intelligence about military movements that might affect the cathedral's interests. The evening hours, when you would be settling into your cold stone chamber after a day of physical labor, represent for the bishop a time of quiet contemplation and scholarly work. By candlelight, he might spend hours working on theological treatises that will influence religious thought for centuries. His writing materials parchment made from carefully prepared animal skins, inks mixed from exotic ingredients, quill pens cut from the finest feathers represent tools of intellectual work that are as specialized as your ropes and bells, but infinitely more expensive and refined. The scriptoriums attached to the bishop's private quarters busy with a different kind of activity than the physical labor that characterizes the rest of the cathedral. Here, scribes work in comfortable, well-lit spaces, copying manuscripts, creating illuminated texts, and preserving the knowledge that forms the intellectual foundation of medieval Christianity. The work requires intense concentration and precise manual skills, but it is performed in warmth and comfort, surrounded by beauty, and supported by resources that make the work itself a form of luxury. The bishop's private chapel, where he conducts his personal devotions, represents the pinnacle of medieval religious art and craftsmanship. Every surface is decorated with paintings, carvings, or precious materials that create an environment designed to lift the spirit and focus the mind on divine contemplation. The altar is covered with cloths woven from the finest materials and decorated with gold thread. The vessels used for private masses are made from precious metals and decorated with gems that catch and reflect the candlelight. The sounds that reach the bishop's ears during his evening routine are as different from your experience as everything else about his life. Instead of the harsh clang of bronze bells and the echo of stone chambers, his environment is filled with the soft sounds of comfort, the rustle of silk clothing, the gentle turning of manuscript pages, the quiet murmur of attendants moving efficiently through their duties. When he does hear the cathedral bells, they reach him as a distant, melodious call to prayer rather than the overwhelming assault of sound that you experience standing directly beneath them. The seasonal changes that make your life as a bell ringer alternatively miserable with cold or exhausting with heat affect the bishop's experience in entirely different ways. His quarters are heated by well-maintained fireplaces that burn seasoned wood rather than the rough fuel available to ordinary people. In summer, the thick stone walls provide natural cooling, and the bishop's chambers are positioned to take advantage of prevailing breezes. His clothing changes with the seasons, but these changes represent choices between different types of luxury, rather than the practical necessity of staying warm or cool with inadequate resources. The social interactions that punctuate the bishop's day illustrate another profound difference between his world and yours. While you work in isolation, seeing other people only briefly and usually, in the context of work-related communication, the bishop's day is filled with meetings, consultations, and formal interactions that require sophisticated social skills. He receives visitors from across Europe, participates in ceremonial functions that require precise knowledge of protocol, and manages relationships with everyone from local nobility to papal representatives. The education that prepared the bishop for his role represents years of study in institutions that were accessible only to those born into privilege or those who demonstrated exceptional intellectual ability. His knowledge spans theology, laws, politics, economics, and classical literature. He can conduct conversations in Latin with scholars from any part of Europe, and he understands the complex theological arguments that shape religious doctrine. This education continues throughout his career as he corresponds with other learned men and participates in intellectual debates that push the boundaries of medieval knowledge. The bishop's evening prayers, conducted in his private chapel, are supported by religious objects that represent the finest craftsmanship of medieval artisans. His personal prayer book is a manuscript that may have taken years to create, with illuminated letters painted by master artists and text copied by the most skilled scribes. The cross he uses for personal devotions may be carved from precious wood or made from gold and decorated with gems. Even his rosary beads are made from materials amber, corals, precious stones that most people would never see, let alone own. The contrast between the bishop's spiritual life and yours as a bell ringer extends beyond material comfort to fundamental differences in how religious devotion is experienced and expressed. While your spiritual life is intertwined with physical labor and the harsh realities of maintaining mechanical systems, the bishop's religious practice takes place in an environment specifically designed to elevate the soul and focus the mind on divine mysteries. His prayers are supported by beauty, comfort, and intellectual sophistication that transform spiritual practice into something approaching aesthetic experience. The medical care available to the bishop represents another dimension of privilege that would be entirely foreign to someone in your position. When illness or injury occurs, the bishop has access to the best medical knowledge available in medieval times. Physicians trained in the medical schools of Europe attend to his health, using treatments and medications that are far more sophisticated than the folk remedies available to ordinary people. His diet, exercise routine, and living conditions are all managed to maintain his health and extend his productive life. The legacy that the bishop will leave behind differs fundamentally from the anonymous service provided by generations of bell ringers. His theological writings may influence religious thought for centuries. The political decisions he makes will affect the lives of thousands of people. The artistic patronage he provides will create works of beauty that will endure long after his death. While your contribution to the cathedral's life is essential, it is also largely invisible, marked only by the daily persistence of bells ringing at their appointed hours. Yet as you drift toward sleep tonight, consider that both the bishop in his warm study and you in your cold tower chamber are parts of the same vast organism that was medieval cathedral life. The bells you ring call him to prayer just as they call the humblest peasant. The building that houses his comfortable quarters also provides your harsh but essential workspace. The God you both serve is the same deity, approached through very different circumstances, but with devotion that transcends the material conditions of worship. The bishop, settling into his comfortable bed with its fine linen sheets and wool blankets, may offer a prayer of gratitude for the bell ringer, whose faithful service maintains the rhythm of cathedral life. And you, despite the ache in your shoulders and the chill of stone against your back, may find peace in knowing that your simple, repetitive work supports a tradition of learning, beauties, and spiritual aspiration that reaches far beyond your individual circumstances. In the end, both the bell ringer's calloused hands and the bishop's soft palms serve the same eternal purpose, each contributing in their own way to a system of worship and community that has endured for centuries, and that continues to provide meaning and structure to human lives long after the particular individuals who created it have returned to dust. As our journey through the medieval cathedral draws to a close, let yourself settle back into the comfort of your present moment. Feel the softness of your bedding, the warmth of your room, the security of your modern life, and appreciate these simple luxuries that would have seemed miraculous to those whose lives we have explored tonight. You have walked, in imagination, up those endless spiral stairs, felt the bite of hemp rope against calloused palms, and heard the overwhelming bronze voices that measured out medieval time. You have witnessed the patient labor of stonemasons whose work outlived their individual ambitions, discovered the hidden chambers where centuries of human secrets were carved into stone, and glimpsed the contrasting world of silk-clad bishops whose spiritual responsibilities were cushioned by material comfort. The medieval bell ringer, whose life we have examined in such detail, represents something both alien to our modern experience and deeply familiar to our human hearts. The specific hardships of that occupation, the cold stone stairs, the deafening bells, the relentless schedule, are thankfully distant from our contemporary lives. But the fundamental human experiences underlying those hardships, the search for meaning in repetitive work, the balance between individual needs and community service, the ways in which physical labor can become a form of spiritual practice, these remain as relevant today as they were 7 centuries ago. Perhaps what emerges most clearly from this exploration is the recognition that comfort and meaning are not always connected in the ways we might expect. The bell ringer's life was harsh, isolated, and physically demanding, yet it was also part of something magnificent and enduring. The bishop's existence was comfortable, intellectually stimulating, and socially prestigious, yet it carried its own burdens of responsibility and isolation. Both lives found their significance not in their individual circumstances, but in their connection to purposes larger than themselves. The cathedral that housed both these very different lives was itself a testament to humanity's capacity for collaboration across time and social boundaries. The same stone walls that provided harsh working conditions for some also created spaces of unparalleled beauty and spiritual power. The bells that assaulted the ears of those who rang them also carried prayers and announcements across entire cities, binding communities together through shared rhythms of work and worship. As you drift toward sleep, you might reflect on the ways in which your own life participates in projects and purposes that extend beyond your individual experience. The work you do, however modern and different from medieval bell ringing, likely serves communities and goals that will outlast your personal involvement. The comfort you enjoy was made possible by the labor and sacrifice of generations who came before you. Just as your own efforts may contribute to the well-being of people you will never meet. The medieval cathedral, with all its contrasts between hardship and beauty, labor and contemplation, individual struggle and collective achievement, offers a powerful metaphor for the human condition itself. We are all, in our various ways, climbing spiral staircases toward purposes we may not fully understand, pulling ropes that connect us to systems larger than ourselves, and contributing our individual efforts to collective accomplishments that will endure long after our personal involvement has ended. Tonight, as you rest in comfort that would have amazed our medieval ancestors, you might spare a thought for all those who have performed essential but difficult work throughout history. The bell ringers and stonemasons, the scribes and servants, the countless individuals whose names are forgotten, but whose labor made possible the beauty, knowledge, and spiritual traditions that continue to enrich human life. Sleep well, knowing that your own comfortable rest is made possible by the dedication of people whose work, like that of the medieval bell ringer, often goes unnoticed, but remains essential to the functioning of the communities and civilizations that shelter and sustain us all. And perhaps, in your dreams, you may hear the distant echo of bronze bells calling across the centuries, reminding us that some rhythms, the rhythm of work and rest, of effort and accomplishment, of individual sacrifice for collective good, remain constant even as the particular forms of our labor change with the passing of time.